What's happening, guys? It's the Wandering Hermit back again. Just doing another entry for the 2018 YouTube Pagan Challenge, this time on the letter E. So, can you guess what it's going to be about? Elements. Natural amount. It's got to be elements, doesn't it? I mean, come on, it's witchcraft. How many people work with the elements? So, I'm curious because I've heard a lot of people discussing whether the elements are actually important in magical practice. Now, for me, as an eclectic pagan, I personally find that the elements are very, very important because naturally I take certain ideals from ancient Greek philosophy and a bit of Roman and obviously some elements of Wicca, some Native American practice. So I kind of slap it all in there. So to me, the elements are very, very important when it comes to magical practice. They're not for everybody, and I think anyone who is looking at how to start the magical practice, I mean, the elements are a good place to start, especially when casting circles and other such things. There is debate as to whether or not the elements are real, or whether they're just a device that we use to focus our intention in certain areas. Ow. Oh yeah, that was my hand. Don't know if you heard that, but that was a crack. That hurt. The elements, to me, are not just philosophical ideals, and they're not just tools that we can incorporate into our practice. They are, but at the same time, just as I've explained with deity, I think that the elements themselves are fundamental principles within the fabric of reality. So, fire, for example, I use a lot of fire in my practice. I do, fire scrying. I burn my offerings. I even use fire to, cleanse myself. Smoke as well. I regard that as part of the element of fire because it's a byproduct of fire. So I use a lot of fire in my practice, even though primarily I am a water person in all of my correspondences. I'm a Piscean. I've got heavy influence from Neptune. I've got heavy influence from Pluto. I've got a heavy influence from Mercury. So it could be regarded that overall I am a water-based being in my spirit. But because of that, through my own sort of occult philosophy that I've kind of written up over the last few years or so, I regard my earthly element governed by my zodiac and my physical planets as being water, and therefore my spiritual element as being the opposite of that, to bring balance, between the earth and sky. And since the two primary elements in most creation myths are fire and water, that seems to make sense to me. In the same way that if your zodiac sign and all of your earthly correspondences are, say for example, air, then it's more likely that your spiritual element is going to be earth. That's just in the system that I've kind of been working with over the last few years, and it does seem to work when I apply this elemental model to other people around me, my wife, my two close friends who are fellow practitioners. The same model actually holds up for them as well. So, going back to using fire in my practice and what fire is, kind of went off on a little tangent there. I do that. Fire to me isn't just the physical flame. Fire is the principle behind what makes fire what it is, which is just quickening of energy. Because if we look at a physical flame, what is a physical flame? It is effectively, the light that you see is piezoluminescence created by molecules bashing into each other erratically and vibrating at a very, very high level. They are air particles that are infused with so much energy that they start to glow. That is what produces the light of fire. In the same way, the heat is exactly the same. Temperature is governed by the vibrational quickness or slowness of molecules, and how fast those molecules are moving, as well as how stuck together they are. So, sorry, furball. got the cat in here, so yeah. Take water, for example. Water exists in 3 primary states, and strangely enough, water is the one substance on this planet that can exist in all 3 of its states within the same kind of environment. So water occupies its solid, liquid and gaseous forms. So we've got ice, we have water, and then we've got vapour. Fire is equivalent to water in its vaporous state, but for air molecules instead of water molecules. And then obviously they're supercharged with energy, so they become extremely hot and extremely bright. That creates the flame. Now, fire to me as a spiritual element is the thing that guides that physical process, because we can say the physical flame can only be created due to a certain sequence of events or a combination of physical attributes which come together to create fire. But there has to be something in place, a blueprint, an energetic or spiritual blueprint, which that physical process then follows. So it could be said that the flame actually exists in spirit or as a concept before the physical process can take place for that fire to physically manifest. I believe the same thing is true of all the elements. Water, what guides the molecules to bind together in a certain way, I believe is a spiritual concept. And this is where the Greeks talk about the spirit of air or the spirit of fire. The sacred pools were said to have their own spirit, and it's not necessarily a nymph or whatever that is separate from the water which then animates it, as you see in some schools of thought. I personally believe that in the example of the sacred pool, that pool itself has its own spirit in the same way that a cat has its own spirit or a human has its own spirit, or in my previous video stated the crystal has its own spirit. I believe that other spirits can then inhabit the sacred pool or draw energy from that sacred pool, but the pool itself is its own being and it has its own spirit in the same way that the flame is its own being and has its own spirit, which is why I do a lot of work with fire, because through that I feel as though I'm connecting to my spiritual element. In one of my articles that I wrote a good few months ago now, I think it was the Discovering the Higher Self, I talk about how I discovered the connection to what some like Hellenic pagans would refer to as Ares, the god of war, or what the Norse would refer to as Tyr, the god of war and justice. A typically fire-related entity. And I believe that that deity, or those deities, or all aspects of the same energy, which is the sort of elemental mirror image or polar opposite of what my physical energetic element is. Yeah, anyway, I'm babbling. In that article, I explained the connection between myself and that higher being. Now, I don't believe that my higher being is Tyr or Ares. I believe that my higher being is my own individual spirit, which is separate from both of them. But it can be regarded as akin to them, a sort of sibling or twin of them, or it operates on the same energetic principle as what Tyr/Ares operates on. And therefore, I think by incorporating symbols synonymous with those deities, I can connect to my own. And that's why I do fire scrying, because if the flame has its own individual spirit, when I scry into the fire, I'm communicating directly with the spirit of that element. And I believe that that is then a conduit for me to communicate to my higher being, my more ethereal essence. So, in the same way that people do water scrying, I believe that not only are they using the water as a reflective tool to look within themselves, which is pretty accurate in many cases, because water is, again, associated with introspection and psychic gifts and other such things. But also, it's possible that when we scry into water, we're communicating with the water spirit, which connects us to the realm of that energetic principle in nature. Okay, I've lost my train of thought. I'm going to try and backtrack here. Don't worry, I'll probably edit this anyway. If not, sorry. But, elements. Yes, they are their own spirits. In my view, they can communicate to us and we can communicate to them. When you go for a walk in nature, if you hear the trees rustling and you seem to feel as though there are voices within that rustling of the leaves, and you stop and listen, you start to get a sense of being communicated to. That happened to me a good few months ago. Actually, it was going on a year ago now. It's when I first started my YouTube channel, and I uploaded my Return to the Dark Hollow video, which some of you may or may not have seen. On my way to that sort of grove of trees, there was this one tree that was rustling as if in a high wind, but there was no wind that day, and none of the other plants around it were moving. And so, because this stuck out to me, I believed that I was being communicated to by a spirit of the tree, or a spirit that inhabited the tree, either way. So I stopped and I listened, and I listened with my ears at first to see if there was a pattern in the rustling. I couldn't discern one, so then I put my hands on the tree and I put my forehead to the tree and I let that tree communicate to me energetically instead, and I got the image of the stones arranged in a spiral. And I thought to myself, God, I sound so bloody northern. I thought to myself at that point, it was either a landwight or spirit of the earth communicating to me, or it was the soul of the tree itself. Either way, I took its advice and I arranged the stones in a spiral. And that really helped with the ritual that I did there to invoke the spirits of the land, because spirals, naturally, if you look at water as it drains down a plug hole, it forms a spiral. If you look at galaxies, they form a spiral. If you look at weather systems, they typically form spirals. They are vortices in nature which draw energy into themselves. And I wanted to draw the energy of the earth, the spirits of the earth, to that place. And so I arranged the stones in that way to invoke the spirits of the earth to inhabit that place and bless that place. So I believe working with elements is a very, very powerful practice, because they are near tangible examples of spirit in nature. Now, in my last video, I talked about how the spiritual and the mundane are actually one and the same. This is a prime example. Working with elements, I think, is one of the best ways to connect to the spiritual within the mundane. It was a point that I wanted to make in the last video, but I completely forgot about it. So I'll use it in this video because it fits. One of the things that drew me to paganism in the first place is when I was stuck in my existential quandary. I couldn't wrap my head around whether there was one God, whether there was many gods, what was divine, whether the sky was divine, whether the earth was divine, whether I was divine, or everything else was instead. The thing that convinced me that the earth itself had its own soul, its own spirit, was when I looked at a grass verge on the side of a main road, busy with traffic, and I saw flies and other little insects in the grass. That really struck me and made me realise that just that one little patch of grass surrounded by the concrete jungle, seemingly detached from nature, was in and of itself its own little rainforest, and it was completely full of life. And that patch of grass was a hub within which other life forms could take root and flourish. That to me demonstrated the microcosm within the macrocosm. You don't need the Amazon rainforest necessarily. I mean, the Amazon rainforest is probably the jewel of this earth, so we need to preserve it, by the way. But the grass itself, seemingly unimportant to the untrained eye, to the ignorant mind, is just a patch of grass. It's not important. But to me, it represented the power of Earth, and how Earth is so infinitely capable of restoring itself and creating and sustaining life in the most adverse conditions. that to me represents the spirit of Earth as well, this solidarity, this constant ability to adapt but remain relatively unchanged. But yeah, the grass itself is like a miniature rainforest. And I've lost my thought again. I can't believe I've lost my thought again. Don't worry, I'll try and edit this before I put it out there. Going back. Previous video. Mundane and the spiritual. Thank you. There you go. Every animal within that little patch of grass has a spirit, and every blade of grass has a spirit, because every blade of grass is an individual single plant. And then you think of how many individual blades of grass are in that one little patch of greenery. Then you realise that little patch of grass, seemingly mundane, is just alive and throbbing with spirit. And so, to incorporate that into my practice, I started grounding. My lawn, my front lawn, is just a little patch of grass. Again, I don't know if it's a natural part of the earth or whether it's a man-made area that has been filled in with soil and then allowed grass to grow on top of it. In either case, the grass is alive. And the animals that exist within the grass, the insects in the grass, the fungi that grow there, we do get mushrooms, and I love the fairy rings that spring up in the summer months. They're just amazing. That again is an indication that that patch of grass, be it purely natural or man-made, is still alive with spirit. And so I stand out there and I put my bare feet on the grass and I ground myself and I connect myself to that earth energy. Even though I'm in the middle of a housing estate, I'm seemingly detached from nature, but nature is right there. And that nature nourishes me. And that nature communicates to me, and that nature actually incorporates itself into my daily life. And so working with the elements, I think, is the perfect way to connect to that in your everyday life. Light a candle. It's such a simple act, but it's elemental magic. By lighting the candle, you are creating a space for the spirit of fire to inhabit. By placing a cup of water on your altar, you're creating a tiny pool, a little sacred pool for the spirit of water to inhabit. By including stones, gemstones, or just a little vial of soil on there, you're, again, creating that space for that spirit of earth to inhabit. And they are conduits for you to communicate to the spirit realm through physical things. So I've rambled on and I've gone off on tangents and I've forgotten my train of thought and had to backtrack, and I'm not sure what else I can say at this point. To me, the elements are a massive part of my practice because they are living, breathing things, and they are conscious, they are self-aware, and they are conscious of everything around them, just as we are. And so I think it's a good idea to work with elements in your practice. I'm coming up to 20 minutes, so I'll try and wrap this up quickly. When casting a circle, if you bear tables of correspondence in mind, typically the elements of air is associated with the direction of east, fire with the direction south, water with the west, but that's because we live, typically in Western Europe, and the ocean is to the west of us, and therefore we typically associate water with the west. In China and Japan, it's the other way around. Water is typically an easterly direction because their ocean is to the east of them. And earth, I don't know whether it's because we associate it with, solidity, and therefore ice is a good example of that. We typically associate earth with the north. So if you're casting a circle and you say spirits of the east, call upon the spirits of the east, you can refer then to the spirit of air and invoke the spirit of air from the east to, help you form the circle. That's just one example of energetic elemental magic without the use of the physical element there. I do this quite often, especially when I'm doing my devotions. I say spirits of the east, the sylphs, the spirits of air, etc. Call upon thee, I honour thee, etc. I do the same with each direction. And finally, what was the other point I was going to make? I haven't a clue. So I'm going to wrap it up there, guys. I'm sorry, I'm not in the right frame of mind for this today. I've had a very, very busy day, and it's just about to get busier. So until my next video, which will hopefully be in the next couple of days, I will bid you all farewell for now. Much love, many blessings. May gods be with you. Bye for now.